The massive trading station Nexus 7 floated in the darkness of space like a giant metal city. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked here every day. Traders, smugglers, and travelers from across the galaxy came to buy, sell, and make deals. The air buzzed with hundreds of different languages as alien species haggled over prices and exchanged goods. Jiwoo had been working the cargo docks for 3 years now. He was just a simple human from Earth, hauling freight containers from one ship to another. Nothing fancy, nothing important, just honest work that paid enough to keep his old transport ship running and food in his belly. Most days were the same. Load cargo, move cargo, unload cargo, get paid, repeat. But today was different. The emergency alarm started blaring around midday. Jiwoo was fixing a broken loading crane in Maintenance Corridor 7 when he heard the crash. Metal screaming against metal, the sound of something big hitting the station hard. Through the thick windows, he could see smoke pouring from docking. Bay 12. Security teams rushed past him, their boots clanging on the metal floors. Jiwoo followed at a distance, curious about what had happened. When he reached the observation deck overlooking Bay 12, what he saw made his blood run cold. A sleek silver ship had crashed into the docking bay. But this wasn't just any ship. Even Jiwoo could tell it was royal. The hull was covered in intricate patterns that seemed to glow with their own light. Crystalline spires jutted from the top, though most were now broken and sparking. Emergency crews surrounded something near. The wreckage. As they moved, Jiwoo caught his first glimpse of her. Princess Nira of the Celestian Empire lay on a medical stretcher, and she was dying. Her skin was silver like polished metal, but now it was stained with purple blood that leaked from deep wounds. Across her arms and chest, she wore what looked like a suit made of living crystal, but the beautiful material was cracked and flickering. Strange lights pulsed weakly inside the crystal, growing dimmer by the minute. Jiwoo had never seen a Celestian before, but he'd heard stories. They were one of the oldest and most powerful races in the galaxy. Their empire controlled hundreds of star systems. They were said to be beautiful, intelligent, and nearly immortal. But this one was clearly dying, the medical team working on her included doctors from several different species. The Kethmari physicians looked like tall lizards, with scales that changed color when they were worried. Right now, their scales were flashing deep red, not a good sign. The Zilnoth healers resembled giant insects with multiple arms that could perform delicate surgery. But instead of working, they were backing away from the princess. Even the benthic medics were shaking their massive heads. Benthics looked like walking whales and were known throughout the galaxy for their compassion. They never refused to help anyone who was hurt. Never. Jiwoo pressed closer to the observation window, trying to hear what they were saying. "The quantum stabilizers are failing," one of the Kethmari doctors hissed, his forked tongue flicking nervously. "Without them, her cellular structure will collapse within hours. We have the equipment to save her," a benthic medic rumbled in their deep, whale-like voice. "The procedure is simple enough." "Simple, yes," another doctor replied, "but impossible." "What? Do you mean impossible?" Jiwoo whispered to himself. As if hearing his question, one of the Zilnoth healers answered. Its voice was like the sound of clicking insects. "The Vorthak Consortium has placed a death mark on the entire Celestian royal family. Anyone who helps her will be marked for death as well." Jiwoo felt his stomach drop. The Vorthak Consortium was the most feared criminal organization in the galaxy. They controlled pirates, assassins, and entire black market networks. When they marked someone for death, that person usually didn't live to see another sunrise. "The bounty hunters are already on their way," the benthic medic said sadly. "Our sensors show 3 Vorthak death ships approaching the station. They'll be here within 6 hours. "Then we let her die," the Kethmari doctor said coldly. "Better one royal than hundreds of station inhabitants." Jiwoo watched in horror as the medical team began packing up their equipment. They were just going to leave her there. This princess, this young woman who had done nothing wrong except be born into the wrong family at the wrong time, was going to die alone on a medical table while dozens of trained doctors walked away through the chaos and the crowd of retreating medics. Princess Nira's eyes suddenly opened. They were the most beautiful color Jiwoo had ever seen, deep violet like the space between stars. but they were also filled with pain and fear. Her gaze swept across the observation deck and somehow found his. For a moment, human and alien stared at each other through the thick glass. In her eyes, Jiwoo saw something he recognized. Not the pride of royalty or the power of an ancient empire, just a young woman who was scared and alone and didn't want to die. She wasn't asking for help. She was too proud for that. But Jiwoo could see the desperate hope in her expression. The same look he'd seen in the mirror years ago when his own transport ship had broken down in deep space, and he'd thought no one would come. Someone had come for him then. A gruff old trader named Captain Ko, who had no reason to help a Brokes. Human cargo hauler. But Ko had fixed his ship anyway, saying simply, "Everyone deserves a chance to make it home." Now it was Jiwoo's turn. The last of the medical team was leaving Bay 12. Security guards were already setting up barriers to keep people away from the contaminated area. Soon, Princess Nira would be completely alone with nothing but her failing life support and the approaching death ships. Jiwoo looked around the observation deck. Dozens of aliens watched from the windows. Traders, travelers, even some of the station's permanent residents. All of them could see what was happening. All of them knew she was going to die. And all of them were doing exactly nothing. Fear was a powerful thing. The threat of the Vorthak made even brave beings into cowards. Jiwoo understood that fear. He felt it too, like a cold weight in his chest. Helping her would probably mean his death. The Vorthak didn't forgive and they didn't forget. But as he watched Princess Nira's crystal suit flicker weaker and weaker, Jiwoo realized something important. Some things were more important than fear. Some things were worth the risk. He had never been a hero. He wasn't strong or smart or special. He was just a human cargo hauler who fixed broken things and tried to make an honest living. But maybe that was enough. Maybe being ordinary was exactly what this situation needed. While everyone else was calculating odds and considering consequences, Jiwoo was already moving toward the service elevator that would take him down to Bay 12. His hands were shaking and his heart was pounding, but his feet kept walking. Behind him he heard someone call out, "Where are you going, human?" Jiwoo didn't turn around. "To help." The elevator doors closed and he descended toward Bay 12, toward a dying alien princess and toward a choice that would change everything. The service elevator seemed to take forever to reach Bay 12. Jiwoo's hands were sweating as he watched the floor numbers change. Level 15, 14, 13. Each number brought him closer to either saving a life or signing his own death sentence. When the doors finally opened, the first thing that hit him was the smell. Burned metal, ozone from damaged electrical systems, and something sweet that he realized must be Celestian blood. Emergency lights cast everything in a red glow, making the crashed ship look even more like a tomb. Princess Nira lay exactly where the medical team had left her. Her crystal suit was flickering so weakly now that Jiwoo could barely see the lights inside. Her silver skin had turned pale, almost gray, and her breathing was shallow and rapid. "Human, what are you doing here?" Dr. Krikstal's voice made Jiwoo jump. The Kethmari physician was the only medical staff member who hadn't completely left. He stood near the emergency exit, clearly ready to run at the first sign of trouble. "I'm here to help her," Jiwoo said, walking toward the princess. "You're insane," Dr. Krikstal muttered, his scales flashing from red to orange to yellow in rapid succession. "The Vorthak will kill us all." Jiwoo knelt beside Princess Nira and ignored the doctor's warnings. Up close, he could see just how badly hurt she was. The crystal suit was cracked in dozens of places, and purple blood was still seeping from wounds on her arms and chest. But it was the failing life support that would kill her first. He'd never seen Celestian technology before, but energy systems were energy systems. His years maintaining old Earth freighters had taught him about jury-rigging failing equipment with whatever parts he could find. The basic principles were usually the same, even with alien tech. "I might not know alien tech," Jiwoo said, pulling a small toolkit from his belt, "but I know desperation when I see it." Princess Nira's violet eyes opened and focused on him with great effort. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Why would you help me? Your species owes mine nothing. Jiwoo paused in his examination of her suit's power coupling. It was a fair question. Humans and Celestians had never been enemies, but they'd never been friends either. The Celestian Empire was ancient and powerful, while humanity was still relatively new to interstellar travel. They existed in completely different worlds, but as he looked into her pain-filled eyes, the answer seemed obvious. "Because you're dying, and I'm not," he said simply. Simple as that. He began disconnecting her failing stabilizers, trying to understand how they worked. The technology was incredibly advanced, but the basic function was clear. They were keeping her cellular structure stable. Without them, her body would literally fall apart at the molecular level. "The power cells are completely drained," he muttered to himself, "and these quantum cores are cracked beyond repair." Dr. Krickstahl had moved closer, despite his fear. Professional. Curiosity seemed to be winning over self-preservation. "Even if you could repair the stabilizers, we don't have replacement quantum cores. They're incredibly rare and expensive." Jiwoo sat back on his heels, thinking hard. Quantum cores were indeed rare, but this was a trading station. If something existed in the galaxy, someone on Nexus 7 probably had it for sale. The question was whether he could afford it. "How much would new cores cost?" he asked. "At least 50,000 credits," Dr. Krickstahl replied. "Probably more on the black market." Jiwoo winced. He had exactly 53,000 credits to his name, 6 months of cargo hauling, living cheap, and saving every penny he could. It was supposed to be his ticket to buying a better ship and starting his own freight business. But looking down at Princess Nira, who was fighting just to stay conscious, the choice was easy. "I'll be back," he told her. "Don't die while I'm gone." The black market on Nexus 7 operated out of the lower levels, in sections that weren't officially part of the station. Jiwoo had been there before, buying spare parts that were too expensive through legitimate channels. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of exotic foods from a dozen different worlds. He found what he needed at Doc's Electronics, a cluttered shop run by a four-armed Zilnoth, who asked no questions as long as the credits were real. 3 quantum cores, still in their protective cases, sat behind the counter like glowing jewels. 60,000 for all 3, Doc clicked in his insect-like voice. "No negotiation. I only have 53,000, Jiwoo replied. Doc's compound. Eyes studied him for a long moment. "What else you got?" Jiwoo thought about his cargo shipment, 6 months of work sitting in his transport's hold. It was supposed to be delivered to the Outer Rim colonies next week. The penalty for not delivering would ruin his reputation, but that seemed less important than saving a life. "I've got a full cargo hold of rare earth minerals," he said, "fresh from the Kepler mining stations." 20 minutes later, Jiwoo was running back through the station corridors with 3 quantum cores in his bag and 0 credits in his account. His cargo shipment now belonged to Doc, along with his dreams of owning a better ship. But none of that mattered right now. He burst back into Bay 12 to find Dr. Krickstahl holding some kind of scanner over Princess Nira. The Kethmari's scales were deep red with worry. "Her cellular cohesion is dropping rapidly," the doctor said, "maybe 10 minutes before complete collapse." Jiwoo's hands moved quickly, installing the new quantum cores into her crystal suit. The technology was strange, but the connections were logical enough. Power flowed from the cores through crystalline conduits, creating a field that held her molecular structure together. As the new cores came online, Princess Nira's suit began glowing brighter. Color returned to her silver skin, and her breathing became deeper and more regular. She wouldn't be running any marathons, but she would live. "Incredible," Dr. Krickstahl whispered. "I've never seen quantum cores integrated so quickly." But their moment of relief was shattered by the sound of docking clamps engaging somewhere else on the station. Through the bay's observation windows, they could see 3 sleek black ships attaching to Nexus 7's outer hull. "Vorthak death ships," Dr. Krickstahl said, his scales turning white with terror. "They're here." Princess Nira struggled to sit up, the new stabilizers giving her enough strength to move. "You have to leave me," she said to Jiwoo. "They'll kill you for helping." But Jiwoo was already helping her to her feet. "Not happening. Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good, because we need to move. Now." As they headed toward the maintenance tunnel Jiwoo had scouted earlier, Princess Nira grabbed his arm. "My family is dead," she whispered, tears flowing down her silver cheeks. "The Vorthak killed them all 3 days ago. I'm the last of the royal line. They won't stop hunting me." Jiwoo helped her into the narrow tunnel that would take them deep into the station's forgotten sections. Behind them, they could hear the sound of heavy boots and harsh voices as Vorthak soldiers began their search. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you," he said, sealing the tunnel entrance behind them. As they crawled through the darkness, Princess Nira couldn't understand why this human was risking everything for her. In her world, people helped others because of duty, politics, or personal gain. But Jiwoo seemed to be helping her for the simplest reason of all, because she needed help. It was a concept that would change how she saw the entire universe. The moment Commander Thekmor stepped off his death ship, every living being on Nexus 7 felt the change in the air. He was massive, even for a Vorthak standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick black armor that seemed to absorb light. His face was a nightmare of scars and cybernetic implants, and his reputation for cruelty was known across the galaxy. Within minutes of his arrival, the station's communication system crackled to life with his cold mechanical voice. "Citizens of Nexus 7, I am Commander Thekmor of the Vorthak Consortium. This station is now under martial lockdown. No ships may leave. No one may enter or exit their quarters without permission. We are hunting a fugitive, and anyone who aids her will share her fate." Through the service tunnels, Jiwoo could hear the announcement echoing from speakers throughout the station. He and Princess Nira were crawling through a maintenance shaft that ran parallel to Level 8, trying to reach the abandoned storage sections where they might be able to hide. "Entire worlds have burned for defying the Consortium," Nira whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. "I've brought death to all these innocent people." "No," Jiwoo said firmly, pulling himself forward through the cramped space. "The Vorthak brought death here. You're just trying to survive." Above them, they could hear the thunder of armored boots as Vorthak soldiers began their systematic search. These weren't ordinary troops. They were the Consortium's elite death squads, trained to hunt down targets that others couldn't find. They carried advanced scanners, military-grade weapons, and had no mercy for anyone who got in their way. Jiwoo had been working cargo runs to Nexus 7 for over 3 years, but he'd been visiting the station for nearly 20 years total. He knew every shortcut, every forgotten corridor, every section that had been abandoned when the station expanded, places that weren't on any official map, where even the station's own security rarely went. They emerged from the maintenance shaft into what used to be a backup life support station. The air recyclers had been moved to a newer section years ago, leaving behind a maze of pipes and machinery that no one bothered to maintain anymore. It was perfect for hiding. "We can rest here for a few minutes," Jiwoo said, helping Nira sit down on an old equipment crate. "They'll search the main levels first." Through the thin walls, they could hear the chaos spreading through the station, doors being kicked in, voices shouting in fear, and the heavy footsteps of soldiers searching room by room. Most of the station's residents were hiding in their quarters, exactly as the commander had ordered, but some were doing more than just hiding. Some were actively helping the Vorthak find their target. Jiwoo's handheld communicator buzzed with an encrypted message from his friend Take, a benthic engineer who worked in the station's power systems. The message was short. "Innkeeper Grix told soldiers about human helping Princess. They know what you look like." "Damn," Jiwoo muttered. Grix ran the cheapest hotel on the station where Jiwoo often stayed between cargo runs. The alien had seen him dozens of times and could easily identify him to the Vorthak. "What's wrong?" Nira asked. "They know I'm helping you. We need to keep moving." They crawled deeper into the forgotten sections of the station through air ducts and service corridors that hadn't seen regular maintenance in years. Jiwoo's knowledge of the station's layout was their only advantage, but it wouldn't last forever. The Vorthak were thorough and they had time. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached an old water recycling plant that had been shut down when the station upgraded its systems. The machinery was still there, but it was cold and silent. Jiwoo thought they would be safe there for a while. He was wrong. They had barely settled into a hiding spot behind some old filtration tanks when the sound of cutting tools reached their ears. Someone was forcing their way through the sealed entrance to the recycling plant. "Stay down," Jiwoo whispered to Nira, but it was too late. 3 Vorthak soldiers burst through the entrance, their black armor gleaming in the dim emergency lighting. They moved with deadly precision, scanning the room with advanced sensors that could detect heartbeats through solid metal. "Targets located," one of them growled into his communicator. "Human male and Celestian female in Section 12 Alpha, Nira." Expected Jiwoo to raise his hands in surrender. That's what any reasonable person would do when faced with 3 professional killers in military armor. The Vorthak soldiers probably expected the same thing. They were already moving forward to capture their targets alive. Instead, Jiwoo grabbed a plasma cutter from a nearby tool rack and launched himself at the nearest soldier. The Vorthak was bigger, stronger, and better armored, but he wasn't expecting a desperate human to attack him with a construction tool. Jiwoo's first strike caught him in the gap between his helmet and chest armor, and sparks flew as the plasma cutter bit into cybernetic components. The soldier roared, in pain and anger, swinging his rifle like a club. Jiwoo barely ducked under the blow, rolling behind a water tank as the other 2 soldiers opened fire. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, leaving glowing holes in the metal walls. Princess Nira watched in amazement as this ordinary human fought 3 trained killers with nothing but a plasma cutter and desperate courage. In her world, royal, guards fought to protect the nobility because it was their duty. But Jiwoo was fighting for her because he chose to, because something in his human nature refused to let her be taken. She realized that humans became more dangerous when they were protecting someone else. Not less dangerous, more dangerous. It was a trait that other species found both admirable and terrifying. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 2 Vorthak soldiers were dead, and the 3rd was unconscious. Jiwoo was bleeding from several wounds, including a nasty plasma burn on his left arm, but he was alive. "We need to move," he said, already gathering supplies from the fallen soldiers. "They'll send more when these ones don't report in." As they escaped deeper into the station's forgotten sections, word of the fight began to spread. Someone had fought the Vorthak and won. A human cargo hauler had taken on 3 elite soldiers and survived. The story grew with each telling. In the Kethmari sections, they whispered about the human's courage. In the Zilnoth quarters, they marveled at his ferocity. Even the usually timid Benthics began to talk about standing up to their oppressors. Some brave souls began to quietly help. Tyke, the Benthic engineer, started providing false sensor readings to throw off the Vorthak search teams. A Zilnoth merchant named Kess smuggled food and medical supplies to drop points where Jiwoo could find them. A young Kethmari maintenance worker named Rena provided information about soldier movements, but most of the station's residents were still too terrified to act openly. The fear of Vorthak retaliation kept them hiding in their quarters, hoping that someone else would solve the problem. Later, as Jiwoo cleaned his wounds in another abandoned section, Princess Nira asked the question that had been bothering her all day. "Why do you fight so hard for me? You barely know me. Your species has no obligation to mine. You could have walked away at any time." Jiwoo winced as he applied antiseptic to the plasma burn on his arm. The pain was getting worse, but they didn't have access to proper medical equipment. He would have to tough it out, because someone has to, he replied simply, "and I'm here." It wasn't a complex answer, but it contained a truth that Princess Nira had never encountered before. In her world of politics and ancient grudges, people helped each other for complicated reasons, involving honor, debt, and mutual benefit. But Jiwoo was helping her for the simplest reason of all, because she needed help, and he was capable of providing it. As the hunt continued around them, Princess Nira began to understand that she wasn't just being protected by a human. She was learning what it meant to be human, and that lesson was spreading throughout the station, one whispered conversation at a time. For 6 hours, Commander Thekmore had searched every official section of Nexus 7. His soldiers had torn apart, cargo bays scanned every shop, and interrogated hundreds of terrified residents. But the Celestian princess and her human protector remained hidden. Thekmore was not used to failure. In his 30 years of hunting fugitives for the Vorthak Consortium, he had never lost a target. His reputation was built on success, and that reputation was what kept lesser criminals in line across the galaxy. If word spread that someone had escaped him, it would encourage others to resist Vorthak authority. He would not allow that to happen. "Bring me 10 residents from level 5, he ordered his lieutenant. "Execute them in the main plaza, make sure everyone can hear." The first scream echoed through Nexus 7's corridors 20 minutes later. Then another, and another. The victims were chosen randomly: a Zilnoth shop owner, a young Kethmari student, an elderly Benthic trader. They had done nothing wrong except be in the wrong place when Thekmor decided to make an example. The message was clear. Every hour the princess remained hidden, more innocents would die. Hidden in an abandoned atmospheric processing station deep. In the station's lower levels, Princess Nera listened to the screams through the communication system and wept. Each death was her fault. Each life lost because she had been too weak to accept her fate with dignity. "This has to stop," she whispered to Jiwoo, who was monitoring security frequencies on a stolen Vorthak communicator. "I should surrender myself." "No," Jiwoo said firmly. "That's exactly what he wants. If you give up now, all those people died for nothing." But they both knew the situation was getting desperate. They were running low on food and water. Jiwoo's wounds were getting infected without proper medical treatment, and more people were dying every hour. They needed supplies, but getting them meant risking capture. "I'll make a quick run," Jiwoo decided. "There's a medical station on level 7 that should have antibiotics and bandages. I can be there and back in 30 minutes. "It's too dangerous," Nera protested. "They'll be watching all the medical facilities." "Maybe. But if this infection spreads, I'll be dead anyway. At least this way one of us has a chance." He was right, and they both knew it. Jiwoo's arm was swollen and hot to the touch where the plasma burn had become infected. Without antibiotics, the infection would kill him within days. The medical station on level 7 was exactly where Jiwoo remembered it. A small emergency clinic tucked between a parts shop and a cantina. The area seemed deserted, which should have been his first warning. But desperation made him careless. He had just grabbed antibiotics and fresh bandages when the lights came on, and 6 Vorthak soldiers surrounded him. They had been waiting in the dark, knowing that eventually he would need medical supplies. "The human rat emerges from his hole," one of them laughed, stunning Jiwoo with an energy weapon before he could even try to run. When Jiwoo woke up, he was chained to a metal chair in the station's main plaza. Commander Thekmor had turned the once bustling marketplace into his personal interrogation center. The shops had been cleared out, and the bodies of executed residents lay in neat rows along the walls, a reminder to anyone watching of the price of defiance. Thekmor stood before him, a towering figure of black armor and cybernetic hatred. His face was a map of old scars, and his artificial eyes glowed red in the dim lighting. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding metal. "So you are the famous human hero," he said, almost amused. "You don't look like much." Jiwoo tried to speak, but his mouth was dry and his head was pounding from the stun blast. Blood ran from his nose where one of the soldiers had hit him during transport. "Tell me where the princess hides and I'll grant you a quick death," Thekmor offered, extending his claws, cybernetic replacements that could cut through steel. "Refuse, and I will make your suffering legendary. I have kept prisoners, conscious for weeks while removing their organs piece by piece." Jiwoo spat blood at the commander's feet. "Go to hell," Thekmor smiled, showing rows of metal teeth. "I was hoping you would say that." What followed was hours of systematic torture that pushed the boundaries of what any living being could endure. Thekmor was an artist of pain, using a combination of nerve stimulators, sonic disruptors, and old-fashioned physical violence to break his victims. He had refined his techniques over decades, learning exactly how much agony he could inflict without killing his subjects. But Jiwoo refused to break. Every few minutes, Thekmor would pause and ask the same questions. Where was the princess hiding? How many people were helping her? What were their names? And every time, Jiwoo gave the same answer: silence or creative suggestions about what the commander could do with his questions. Hidden in their refuge, Princess Nera monitored the station's communication frequencies and heard every scream. The Vorthak were broadcasting the torture session on open channels, making sure everyone on the station could hear what happened to those who defied them. She learned things about humans that no textbook had ever taught her. She learned that when they chose to protect someone, they didn't give up. They didn't calculate odds or weigh benefits. They simply endured, no matter the cost. Hours passed. Jiwoo's screams grew weaker, but his resolve never wavered. He revealed nothing, not her location, not their escape routes, not the names of the few brave souls who had helped them. His unwavering loyalty baffled the Vorthak, who couldn't comprehend such selflessness. In their culture, everyone had a breaking point. Everyone could be bought, threatened, or tortured into submission. But this human seemed to operate by different rules entirely. Throughout the station, residents listened to the torture session with growing shame. Here was an alien, not even one of their own species, suffering unimaginable agony to protect someone he barely knew. Meanwhile, they cowered in their quarters, afraid to even speak out against their oppressors. Station Commander Hyuk was the first to crack. The massive Benthic had initially refused to get involved, claiming that helping the princess would bring disaster to his station. But listening to Jiwoo's screams while hiding in his office was more than his conscience could bear. "This is wrong," he rumbled to his security chief, a Kethmari named Teklon. "We're letting a hero die while we hide like frightened children." "He's not our responsibility," Teklon replied, though his scales had turned the deep blue color that indicated shame. "If we act against the Vorthak, they'll destroy the entire station." "They're already destroying it," Hyuk said, standing to his full 10-foot height. "One scream at a time." The rescue operation that followed was hastily planned, but surprisingly effective. Hyuk had spent 40 years running Nexus 7, and he knew every security system and defensive measure on the station. More importantly, he finally found the courage to use that knowledge. While a team of volunteers created diversions throughout the station, Hyuk led a strike force to the main plaza. They weren't soldiers, just shopkeepers, engineers, and traders who had finally found something worth fighting for. But they fought with the desperation of people who had watched their principles die, one scream at a time. The battle was brief, but vicious. When it was over, half of Hyuk's volunteers were dead or wounded, but Commander Thekmor lay unconscious among the wreckage of his interrogation equipment. The remaining Vorthak soldiers had retreated to their ships, confused and demoralized by the sudden resistance. They found Jiwoo barely alive, his body broken but his spirit undefeated. Even unconscious and dying, he had not revealed Princess Nira's location. His courage had finally shamed an entire station into action. As medical teams rushed to save his life, word spread throughout Nexus 7 of what the human had endured. He had shown them all what it meant to stand for something greater than yourself, even when the cost was everything you had. The hunt was far from over, but something fundamental had changed. The residents of Nexus 7 had remembered what it felt like to be brave, and they had learned it from a simple cargo hauler who had never thought of himself as a hero. Jiwoo spent 3 days drifting in and out of consciousness in the station's medical bay. His body was broken from Thekmor's torture, but the doctors said he would live. More importantly, he had kept Princess Nira's location secret, even when facing the worst pain imaginable. During those 3 days, everything changed on Nexus 7. The rescue operation had only been the beginning. Once the station's residents had tasted what it felt like to fight back, they couldn't stop. Small groups began sabotaging Vorthak equipment throughout the station. Engineers cut power to sections where the soldiers were searching. Shopkeepers refused to sell them supplies. Even the usually timid cleaning staff started providing false information about Princess Nira's possible hiding spots. But the Vorthak weren't going to give up easily. On the 4th day, massive shadows fell across the observation windows as 3 Vorthak battleships took positions around Nexus 7. Each ship was the size of a city block, bristling with enough weapons to turn the entire station into space dust. The message was clear: surrender the princess or everyone dies. Commander Thekmor, his head bandaged from the rescue attempt, stood in the main plaza and addressed the station through the communication system. "Citizens of Nexus 7, you have made a grave mistake. You have defied the Vorthak Consortium and harbored our enemies, but I am feeling generous today. Deliver the Celestian Princess to me within 1 hour, and I will allow your station to continue existing. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why entire star systems fear our name." In her hiding place, Princess Nera listened to the ultimatum and felt the weight of thousands of lives pressing down on her shoulders. Through the thin walls, she could hear the frightened whispers of the people who had risked everything to protect her. Families with children, elderly couples, young workers just trying to make a living, all of them would die because of her. The choice was obvious. Against the protests of the brave volunteers who had been guarding her, Princess Nera walked out of her hiding place and made her way to the main plaza. She had cleaned her crystal suit as best she could and stood tall with the dignity expected of Celestian royalty. If she was going to die, she would die like an empress. The plaza was packed, with station residents, all of them forced to watch as their fate was decided. Vorthak soldiers formed a circle around the center, their weapons trained on the crowd to prevent any more rescue attempts. Commander Thekmor waited in the middle of the circle, his armor polished and his cybernetic eyes glowing with satisfaction. He had won, as he always did. Soon the princess would be dead, the station would be under Vorthak control, and his reputation would be restored. But Princess Nera surprised everyone with what she said next. "I challenge you to single combat for the honor of my bloodline," she announced, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the plaza. The crowd gasped. Even the Vorthak soldiers seemed shocked. Single combat was an ancient tradition, respected by warrior cultures throughout the galaxy. If she won, her enemy would be obligated to honor the terms of victory. If she lost, at least she would die fighting. Commander Thekmor threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing off the plaza walls like grinding metal. "You would face me? A pampered princess against a warrior who has killed thousands? You've spent your life in crystal palaces, while I've been forged in the fires of war. This is suicide, not courage." But Princess Nera had learned something during her time hiding with Jiwoo. She had watched him fight 3 armed soldiers with nothing but a plasma cutter and desperation. She had seen him endure hours of torture rather than betray her location. She had witnessed what humans called courage, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you from doing what was right. Sometimes courage wasn't about being the strongest or the most skilled. Sometimes it was about refusing to abandon what mattered to you, no matter the cost. "I accept your challenge," Thekmor said, drawing a curved blade that gleamed with energy. "When you're dead, I'll execute every person on this station who helped you, starting with your human pet." The duel began in the center of the plaza, surrounded by thousands of witnesses from dozens of different species. Thekmor was everything he claimed to be: bigger, stronger, more experienced, and utterly ruthless. His blade moved like lightning, each strike designed to cause maximum pain before delivering the killing blow. But Princess Nera fought with something he couldn't understand. She didn't fight like a Celestian royal, trained in the elegant sword forms of her people. She fought like Jiwoo had fought, with desperate courage and the absolute refusal to give up. When Thekmor's blade cut her shoulder, she kept fighting. When his boot caught her in the ribs and sent her sprawling, she got back up. When blood ran into her eyes and her crystal suit cracked from repeated impacts, she still kept coming. She was fighting for more than her own life. She was fighting for Jiwoo, who had sacrificed everything to protect her. She was fighting for the station, residents who had found their courage by watching a human refuse to abandon a stranger. She was fighting for the principle that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than surviving. The battle lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. Thekmor's superior skill and experience should have ended it quickly, but he couldn't break Princess Nera's spirit. Every time he thought he had won, she found some hidden reserve of strength and kept fighting. Near the end, when both fighters were bloodied and exhausted, Thekmor made a mistake. Overconfident in his victory, he left himself open for just a moment. Princess Nera's blade, guided by desperation and the memory of human courage, found the gap in his armor and pierced his heart. Commander Thekmor fell to his knees, his cybernetic eyes flickering and going dark. With his dying breath, he whispered, Impossible, but it wasn't impossible. It was human. The Vorthak fleet, bound by their warrior codes, withdrew from Nexus 7. Their commander had been defeated in honorable combat, and their culture demanded they respect the outcome. Princess Nira had won not just her freedom, but the safety of everyone on the station. Word of what happened spread across the galaxy faster than light-speed travel. The story grew with each telling, but the core remained the same. A human cargo hauler had shown an entire station what courage looked like, and that courage had inspired a princess to defeat the most feared warrior in Vorthak space. When Princess Nira was crowned Empress of the Celestian Empire a month later, one of her first acts was to declare humanity under imperial protection. Any attack on human worlds would be considered an act of war against the Celestian Empire, but when she visited Jiwoo in the hospital to thank him personally, he seemed more interested in getting back to work than in galactic politics. "You could have anything," she told him, still amazed by his simplicity. "Wealth beyond imagination, titles that would make you nobility on 100 worlds. I could give you entire star systems to rule." Jiwoo smiled from his hospital bed, his arm still, in a healing cast but his eyes bright with life. "I just want to get back to my cargo runs," he said. "Though maybe next time someone needs help, there'll be more than just me willing to step up." He was right. The story of the human who refused to abandon a dying alien princess had inspired beings across the galaxy. Cargo haulers, shopkeepers, engineers and ordinary citizens began standing up to bullies and tyrants in ways they never had before. They had learned that you didn't need to be a trained warrior or a powerful noble to make a difference. You just needed to be willing to help when help was needed. The Empress declared humanity under Celestian protection, but Jiwoo's real victory was simpler and more profound. He had reminded the galaxy that sometimes the strongest force in the universe wasn't advanced technology or military might. Sometimes it was just someone who refused to walk away when another person needed help, and that lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come, carried by ordinary beings who had learned what it meant to be human.